like to pose a question to you as lawyers, as a former lawyer. It's the question we get asked so often when we're young. What do you want to be when you grow up? Great. Buy some Bitcoin SV. What do you want to be in your future? It's the question I faced when I finished law school, which was in the mid-1990s, right at the boom of the internet. For those of you who remember those years, that was when email emerged. These things called web browsers. We had modems that piled into AOL and made funny noises. And at the time, lawyers were really scared of the internet. I was this, young lawyer going into law firms, being a nice, bright associate, and the partners in the firm would be like, Jimmy, what's this internet thing? And I would say, oh, actually, I've been trying some web browsers and checking out AOL. And it heightened in my mind a question that I would pose to you as lawyers. Why are lawyers so afraid? Why are lawyers so risk averse? I was one of those. In truth, I still am. There's a part of me that's always thinking, am I doing the right thing? Am I taking too ambitious of a path? Should I be more cautious? And there's something about lawyer personalities that's afraid of risk. It's why you're so great at risk management. It's why you're so great at sending people like me memos, giving me legal advice that says, it depends. You decide. You make the business decision. And that's why lawyers can be afraid of technology. And it's why our corporate clients for years would reach out to us, but you sometimes wonder, what am I doing advising companies about technology? And at the time in the 1990s, people were afraid of the internet. Do you remember that, thinking, oh, if I'm a big corporation, should I be acting on the internet? Should I be doing things digitally? And the companies that survived and succeeded got over their fear. They did not become afraid of the future. They did not follow the future. They led the future. So the question for you as in-house counsel, or for you as outside counsel, is who do you want to be when you grow up in today's new technology era? In the internet, do you want to be Netflix that thrived by adjusting its business model to the internet era? Or do you want to be Blockbuster Video that essentially does not exist anymore because it did not adapt its business model to the internet? We are seeing in today's realm the next major technology leap of our lifetime, blockchain technology, that will change the world to the level of the internet. It's the next major technology leap that will affect your clients, your companies, and everything around you. It's coming. And you have a moment right now to think as lawyers, here convened for this International Corporate Counsel College, of who do I want to be in this world? Someone who follows the future or doesn't follow it at all and then ends up as Blockbuster Video, or do I want to be the Netflix of my generation? So today, I want to spend a few minutes at the end of this dinner talking to you about how you can choose to lead the future rather than follow the future. How you can choose to say, for a little bit of my lawyer personality, for once in my life, maybe I will not be so afraid. And maybe I will tell my clients not to be so afraid. So lead the future. That's what I want you to leave tonight thinking and knowing about Bitcoin and blockchain, because that is more important than how the technology actually works or what it does. So I want to spend my time today talking about 3 things to help guide you to this journey to lead the future. 1, answering the question that a lot of you in this room are probably thinking right now because you're lawyers and you're thinking, Jimmy, what the hell is a blockchain? I've heard about it. I kind of think I understand it. Well, tonight you're going to understand what a blockchain is. You're also going to understand what are some of the use cases of how blockchain technology can be used by your clients and your companies. And finally, I'm going to spend some time talking about the legal issues that will lead blockchain technology to shape and transform the legal profession and the laws in which we deal with around the world. And that is your opportunity to say, I'm not afraid of this next major technology leap, and I'm going to help lead the future. So you ready to lead the future? Yes, you are. You there, you are ready to lead the future. So let's begin with what is a blockchain? We've heard about it, but blockchain technology is the answer to a common problem in a lot of industries, which is intermediaries. In a lot of industries, there are middle people. There are companies, people that sit in between processes, that take up time, that take up money, that charge fees for doing things to connect so much of the ecosystem. So think about our payment system. For example, if you want to pay at a restaurant or a store with a current credit card, what happens in the ecosystem? Well, you have a card issuer who issues the card here. And then you have a card scheme, a payment network like the Visa network. You have merchant acquirers who aren't even the merchants themselves. Hey, merchant acquirer. Give it up for merchant acquirer. What's your name?
Alexandra.
Alexandra, thank you for being a merchant acquirer. We appreciate it.
Actually, we are.
Okay, great. And then you acquire merchants to help get yourself into the payment card system. And that is what is needed for you as the card holder paying at a grocery store, at a coffee shop to make a payment in the system. And you know what? Alexandra and everyone on this chart, you take a fee. And that's okay. You need to make money. You need to pay for your salary.
We barely survive.
Barely, minimal. You're a charitable purpose, right? You provide charity to the world. They take a fee, and that creates inefficiencies. So the Bitcoin system and the original blockchain was trying to answer this question. How do we create a new model where in each step in this process, not only does someone not take a fee, you don't have to trust that company with the transaction, with the knowledge of whether the transaction is true or not. It's trying to create a system where there is needed to be less trust in the world. And that's how the blockchain world got born to, the blockchain got born to the world. So what ultimately is a blockchain? It sounds really complicated, but it's really simple. It's a ledger, a record-keeping system. In olden days, people kept financial transactions in a ledger in a book. They wrote down, I had £5. I sent it to Christopher. Now he has the £5. And they kept it in a book. A blockchain comes up with this concept of saying, all right, I want to create a system where you don't have to trust one government, one central bank, one payment processor to keep the transactions, because they might cheat. They might change the transactions. They might do something weird. So how do you create a system where the ledger, the record of the transactions of the system, are kept by many people so that all around the world you can get access to that ledger of transactions from not just one source, but maybe thousands. So it's really hard to change the ledger. It's really difficult to cheat on a transaction because you have to change it on many, many copies of the same ledger. So a blockchain system just takes the concept of a ledger, instead of keeping it in one source, distributes it all over the world into many nodes. So it's a distributed digital ledger. It's secured by cryptography in order to protect the security of the transactions. And as a result, it records transactions, passing from one person to another. Bitcoin, the original blockchain. I send a Bitcoin to you, Caroline, then it gets passed on to another person, and each of those transactions is tracked chronologically on a digital ledger. And so, how does this structure actually work? Well, a blockchain is called a blockchain because it's just a series of blocks. And each of the blocks are containing data. They contain all of the transactions. So for example, if we're all operating today on the Bitcoin network, everyone in this room could be sending a transaction right now. And I'm going to collect all of those into a single block. I batch them. And then I add them to the prior blocks to create an ongoing chain of data blocks that record on an average basis, about every 10 minutes, new transactions, and new transactions, and new transactions. It's an ongoing chain. They're numbered by the height of the block. And then once a transaction is stored in the block, one of the powers of a true blockchain is it's difficult to change. It's what we call immutable. You can't change them. You can trust that once a transaction gets put into this block, you cannot change it. You cannot commit fraud. You cannot be the Enron company and cook the books. Because to change the transaction, you have to get many of the nodes, the people who keep a copy of the same ledger, to change it. And not only that, if you want to change a transaction that happened a long time ago, you have to change every block that came since. That's really hard. It's really difficult. And it's why blockchain has this power to provide what we in the Bitcoin world called a universal source of truth. If you could trust one record-keeping system kept by thousands of computing nodes around the world, because it's so hard to change it, could we believe that's the universal source of truth, of information in the world? And that's the structure of a blockchain. The blocks that store data, usually it's payment data, but as we'll learn, they can store all kinds of other data, and that's part of the power of what the blockchain can do. They are created periodically through a process called mining. I'm not going to get into the details of mining, but basically, it is a way to incentivize computing nodes around the world to donate their power, not donate, but to contribute their computing power to maintain this whole system. And they represent a series of events that have happened on a consequential time basis. This is the original Bitcoin blockchain, the very first blockchain that emerged and succeeded in the world. Birthed to the world through this, the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, which introduced Bitcoin, released to the world in 2008, creating the concept of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It was the first one that really worked. Here's a visual diagram of how the Bitcoin blockchain system works. I think of the blockchain kind of as this, in the middle. It's a giant Excel spreadsheet in the sky. Instead of you just keeping it on your computer, lots of people keep it. And there's computing nodes all around the world that maintain a copy of the same Excel spreadsheet in the sky, the same digital ledger. Therefore, to change the ledger, you need at least half of those nodes to agree. That's why it makes it very hard to cheat the ledger. You have to convince half of them that the transactions have changed. And therefore, you create the system where all around the world, people are keeping a copy of the same ledger that is public and auditable. And these are the key characteristics of what I consider a true blockchain. It is a system which is decentralized, meaning there's no one person in charge. You don't need someone's permission to operate and access this system. It's permanent. Once you record a transaction to that blockchain, you can't change it because you have to go back and convince all the people that were the nodes that something's wrong. Think about it this way. If all of you in this room were a Bitcoin node, and we all decided, all right, I sent a transaction to Christian over there, it's valid. And then later I go try to change it so I get my money back. I have to convince more than half of you that my transaction should come back to me. It's theoretically possible, but very difficult in the Bitcoin system. So Bitcoin's blockchain operates on this kind of consensus mechanism. It's almost like a public vote to make sure the transactions are valid. They're transparent because the blockchain is public. You don't need anyone's permission. Anyone can access it. So they can verify that the information is correct. And this is very important to what a blockchain is. It's secure, it's private, and it's robust because its nodes are distributed across the world. Now, a lot of you are sitting there with your companies and your clients, and you've probably heard of other forms of blockchain projects besides Bitcoin. Frankly, there are far too many. We live in a world of 1,000 different blockchain and cryptocurrency projects. Most of them, in my view, are not a true blockchain. You'll hear about things which are called distributed ledger technologies, or a private blockchain, or a permission blockchain. Do you know how I describe the difference? It's the difference between the global public internet that you don't need anyone's permission to operate on, and intranets, which companies and organizations have where they give permission for people to operate on. So for example, IBM has a platform called Hyperledger, which is more of a permission blockchain, meaning you need their permission to operate on it. They can change the data. It's not necessarily bad. It doesn't just have the qualities of a public blockchain. So you'll see this sort of dichotomy that's happening about public versus private blockchains. We believe there's value in public blockchains for applications which we'll talk about. So if blockchains have all of this power, especially Bitcoins, why haven't we seen it being more successful? Well, now I'm going to give you a brief history of the battles that have happened in the Bitcoin world and the battles that took me out of my legal practice to join this crazy world. Bitcoin's blockchain operates by adding a block of transactions on average every 10 minutes. Well, what you think is Bitcoin, the BTC network I'm referring to, its ticker symbol that it's traded on exchanges, the developer groups that took control of that blockchain restricted the size of the block to 1 megabyte. That's teeny, teeny, tiny. That's the size. If I took a picture on my phone and send it to you by text message, it's about 1 megabyte. It doesn't hold that many transactions. It means that the BTC blockchain, what is considered the original Bitcoin blockchain, only does on average 3 transactions a second, or its maximum capacity is 7 transactions a second around the world. Bitcoin was birthed to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, meaning you should be able to use it fast, cheaply, instantaneously. Well, if you want to rival the Visa payment network, you can't do that on teeny tiny blocks. The Visa payment network averages 2,000 transactions a second, and at its peak, 56,000 transactions a second. So what's the answer to this? The answer is what our world of Bitcoin, our camp, has been advocating for, which is you need to make the blocks big, really big, to fit more transactions. I say in speeches around the world, I like big blocks, and I cannot lie, because you need big blocks to achieve unlimited scaling. The Ethereum blockchain network, which you've probably heard about, for a period of time caught excitement as the enterprise blockchain. You could do smart contracts, you could do tokens. Vitalik Buterin was super cool. Well, the Ethereum blockchain is finally acknowledging it's running into scaling issues. Its blockchain is full and it cannot onboard new users because no one can solve this scaling problem. Think about it, if you're creating a whole new network, a payment network and a data network, do you want to create a network with a single little alley lane or a big giant highway where you can support massive numbers of transactions? That's our vision of the Bitcoin world. What is the practical effect of this, and how does it affect the businesses of the world that are considering to use blockchain? Well, it affects fees. When I send a Bitcoin transaction, I have to actually pay a fee to the miner who adds it to the blockchain. And what's happened in the BTC's history is that when there is significant demand on the network, the fee you have to pay goes up. It's kind of like sending an overnight courier package, and you pay more to get it overnight in 1 day than to get it in 3 days. And so over the course of BTC's history, this is a chart of fee prices, where in January of 2018, when there was this huge craze for people to buy Bitcoin, and a lot of people were transacting on the network, it spiked up to cost almost $40 US to send a single transaction on the Bitcoin network. And it's dropped down since then, but it comes down to $3, $4, $5 sometimes, or 40 cents or $1.40. The reality is no one will use Bitcoin as a daily cash system if it costs $40 to pay for a transaction at your grocery store or at your coffee shop. It won't work. And in May of 29th of this year, the transaction fee had come down, but it still was about $4 US on the BTC network. The reality is the old Bitcoin network, the fees are not just higher than they need to be, they're unreliable. If you're an enterprise that wants to build an application on the BTC blockchain, you know what enterprises want. They want budget reliability. They want to know how much it's going to cost. They don't want to build an application thinking, well, it might be $1 a transaction one day, and another day it's $4 a transaction, and another day it's $40, and another day it's 40 cents. Enterprises of the world don't operate that way. They operate on reliability. So that's why our association and our allied supporters birthed Bitcoin SV. It was birthed out of the world's first Bitcoin hash war last year, which was a battle over control of the Bitcoin protocol. And it is designed, and it's called SV, because it's designed to restore the Satoshi vision, the original design and protocol of Bitcoin's creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, to unleash the power of the blocks, to make them bigger, because you can't have a global network when the blocks stay so small. And that's what our association does. When I first left legal practice, I joined nChain, one of the leading blockchain research and development businesses of the world, based in London and Antigua, and then I became its CEO, and it is one of the big backers that does the development work behind Bitcoin SV. And then we formed the Bitcoin Association to be the leading global industry organization to lead this effort to make Bitcoin ready for business. That's our biggest differentiator. Many people in the cryptocurrency world are crypto anarchists. They don't like banks. They don't like governments. They don't like big businesses. I come from the corporate legal world like all of you, and we're engaging with governments and enterprises to create a Bitcoin blockchain that is meant for business. So how are we doing this? Here's how. Super, super low fees, a massive network that can sustain enterprise usage by the biggest companies in the world. Whereas BTC transactions might cost $4, $1, transactions on our network cost less than 1/10 of 1 US cent to send. And we think that's still too high. It should be even fractions of that, so the global enterprises of the world use this blockchain. Well, how are we doing that? Like I said, I like big blocks, and I cannot lie. And this is the really simple equation of it. The BTC network on its blockchain remains at 1 megabyte blocks, super tiny. There's another one called Bitcoin Cash, BCH, which remains at 32 megabyte blocks. Through a protocol upgrade we did on our network in July of this year, our block size is 2 gigabytes. That's over 2,000 megabytes. We fit far more transactions, make them super fast, and keep them really cheap to transact with. That means we can support throughput for enterprise class needs. At 2 gigabyte size, we can do 9 to 14,000 transactions per second on our network to rival the Visa, MasterCard payment networks, and have 5 to 8 million individual transactions in a single block on average every 10 minutes. What does this mean for the future? In February of this year, we're implementing what we call the Genesis upgrade. It's an upgrade to bring Bitcoin back as close as possible to its original design and protocol from Satoshi Nakamoto, which is why we've named it the Genesis upgrade. And we're therefore lifting the block cap entirely. There is no block limit on our network, and instead, the market forces should define what it should be. It allows for unlimited scaling, just like the internet grew to unlimited potential. Think about this. If we at the beginning of the internet, someone said, we should only allow 100 websites at any time on the internet never would have grown. We're only going to allow so much data to flow across email. Who would use email? It never would have grown. So it's the idea that you believe in this original power of unlimited scaling in Satoshi's vision that is driving us. In fact, we believe in a future of terabyte-sized blocks, which is monstrous, 1 million megabytes to process billions of transactions and millions of transactions a second. And at that scale, what happens is that Bitcoin SV becomes a project in Bitcoin that provides the capacity to act as a global enterprise blockchain, a data carrier, more than just payments, but to power all the enterprise applications that your clients and companies are thinking about doing. So what can you use this for? Let me give you a few examples that I think you as lawyers will really understand, because it's things I thought about in the legal world. So I was an IP and digital tech lawyer, and one of the frustrations I always had is when clients would call me up, particularly, for example, in the motion picture world in Los Angeles, and say, hey, Jimmy, I am trying to track the title of this book, which I think has been optioned into a film, which might have been sold into a television series, because I want to do a deal and I want to make sure I have the rights. It's a very difficult process to track all that. But think about what a blockchain allows. It's a public ledger. It's a way to record data. What if I could record in the blockchain the fact that somebody owns a piece of copyrighted material, identified by their copyright registration number, and then later someone enters into a deal, passing money from one hand to the other, selling the rights to another person. And then I record on the blockchain later the transfer of the copyright title and registration and ownership. So in the future, if you are trying to do a title search, it is much faster and easier to trace the chain of title on the blockchain. Imagine this. Supply chain management and provenance is another big area for blockchain ideas. You know, we have customs processes and the tracking of shipment of products around the world. And it takes all this paper and all these intermediaries. But what if you could have the information put on a blockchain so that every step of the supply chain management process, someone recorded this package came to this port. It contained this amount of boxes. And then it could be tracked instantly on the blockchain. In fact, there's a company that one of our allied companies has invested in, Unisod. It's a startup in Norway, which is building a supply chain management solution built on the Bitcoin SV blockchain because of our scale and cheap fees, to integrate with SAP's ERP software, which manages about 80% of the world's supply chain, to help make more efficient the whole process of tracking supply chain management across the world. What about music? I did a lot of work in the entertainment and movie industry during my LA legal career. And one of the most complex things is music rights management. If you're Beyonce and you release a new song, it's not just Beyonce who gets paid every time that song gets played. There's probably like 8 writers, composers, people who contributed to that song, and they all have little percentages. And how it works now in the music world is there are these performing rights organizations in the United States, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, who come knocking on companies' doors saying, hey, Swiss Re Global Center for Dialogue, you're playing our music, you need to pay us some money. And then they distribute those royalties across to all the song rights holders. And it's complicated, and they have to track that all for every individual song, and they take a cut of the fee. Well, what if you created a new model for releasing music, where I'm a music artist, I release a piece of music through a digital file on the blockchain. It's pre-coded into the digital file who are the people who should get paid every time the music file is played or downloaded. And then I, as a fan, access the file. I pay a small amount of Bitcoin. Instead of to Spotify, I may pay it directly to the artist. And then I pay it on the blockchain, and then what happens? Through a digital wallet, each of the 4 people who get a percentage of the amount of money I pay to access the file get automatically paid some percentage, which you can do in small micropayments because BSV's transaction fee, remember, is so low. Less than 1/10 of a penny. So you can be sending 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, rather than waiting for the end of a quarter or the end of the year for a royalty statement. It makes the process of managing rights, revenue shares, and royalties so far more efficient than the world we have today. And you think this is something in the future, but there is a company in South Korea which just announced at a major Bitcoin SV conference I helped host in Seoul, South Korea a couple weeks ago, the very start of this. One store is the 2nd largest mobile app store in South Korea. It rivals Google and Apple's store. And it is preloaded on every Android device in South Korea, therefore reaching a target audience of 35 million users. It found the Bitcoin SV blockchain and said, this is what blockchain is supposed to be. Its CEO came to our conference and announced this, BoostCon, its new music content delivery platform being built on the Bitcoin SV blockchain. It allows a music artist through an app to upload music content, a video, a song. You as a user can pay for access to the song as much through a touch token-like instrument, which is based on Bitcoin SV. And when I pay as a user and I show some love over to the artist, what do? You can pre-code the file for each of the people who are entitled to a percentage of royalties from the song, and therefore, once I as a user pay the artist, each of the rights holders can automatically be distributed a piece of the royalties. So I ask you to think, as lawyers and as business people, what can you record on the blockchain? People think of blockchain as payments, cryptocurrencies, but it's really just data. What kind of data can be recorded in a public ledger that everyone can access that can make our business processes more efficient? It could be everything from money, IP like copyright notices, data and information. It could be contracts, leases. It could be loyalty points, customer rewards points. It could be property title. These are the kinds of things that are happening in the world. And that gets us to the world of smart contracts. There's a panel we're going to have tomorrow that talks about this, but I'll give you a brief overview because it's something that you'll hear a lot about as lawyers. How does this power world of smart contract? What a smart contract is taking an agreement in the real world and automating its key functions on the blockchain so that, for example, if I pay all my auto lease payments at the end of the term, the title will pass to me upon, for example, payment of the very last amount. So a smart contract basically just takes conditions and programs them into code. They're not right for all forms of contracts. In fact, complex business agreements probably are not right for them. They're right for agreements where there's a very black and white. If A happens, B happens. If I pay the amount of money in time, then I get title to the property handed over to me. If I pay you for that copyright assignment, then it gets recorded in the Copyright Office. And so that's what a smart contract is. So think about it in the concept of a house. I'm buying a house. Right now we use escrow services, right? Where I buy property, I have to deposit the money with the escrow service. They have to make sure all the escrow instructions are fulfilled. And then they pass the money on to the seller, and then they move the title on the property registry. What if you could automate all that? You reach the terms of an agreement for the sale of a house. You code all that, and all of the steps, like the registry, the payment, is automatically done on the blockchain. The money gets paid through Bitcoin. Once it hits your wallet, the title is automatically changed on a registry that's maintained by your county or city or government on the blockchain. Much more efficient than today's system. And this is how the world is going to change. So we're here in Zurich in Switzerland. What?
My bank already does that.
That's great. You can do it on the blockchain now. Right? There's nothing wrong with moving to the blockchain where it's public and auditable. Well, you have to code it into the contract. That's what you do. And it doesn't mean that when you have the blockchain world, you eliminate disputes. There's no reason why there aren't still disputes. And as we'll mention, that's a role for lawyers. But think about the insurance world, because we are here, in Switzerland, where there's a lot of insurance companies. I don't buy travel insurance, and most people don't buy travel insurance. Do you know why? Because nobody wants to go to the trouble of submitting a claim in the event there's an incident. Your flight is late, there's something wrong with your hotel. People don't want to go through the claim process. But one of the things that's being discussed in the travel insurance world is, what if you created a smart travel insurance policy? So think about it this way. If I'm Alice, I want to buy a travel insurance contract, let's say for $20, 20 Swiss francs, that says, in the event my flight is late, I've booked a flight, and in the event my flight is late, let's say more than 4 hours, I get paid a claim amount to compensate me for my time, right? For maybe I have to book another flight, I have to pay for a hotel. And people don't want to do that now, but if you could automate it on the blockchain through a smart contract, or what's called an oracle, which feeds into a smart contract publicly available flight data, because flight information is publicly available from government agencies, which will tell you that Alice's flight, when it lands, is it 4 hours or more late than its originally scheduled time? And if it is, then she can get automatically paid, let's say $200, immediately to her Bitcoin wallet without having to submit a claim form. It would make the process more efficient and probably incentivize more consumers to consider buying travel insurance. So this is a rudimentary example of ideas that are being floated out in the insurance world and in other industries. And it leads me finally to talk about, how does this affect all of you as lawyers, right? Because most of you in the room are lawyers. You're thinking about, okay, how does this technology affect our lives? How do I lead this future rather than following it? Let me give you a few examples. One is a regulatory question. There are, of course, a lot of questions about cryptocurrency. Is there fraud? Is there bad behavior? And the answer is yes. And we don't want to keep seeing these headlines. Quadriga CX was an exchange in Canada whose founder died and had supposedly all of the private keys to be able to access the hot wallet of all the customer accounts. And so all the customer funds were lost because they didn't follow what were expected regulatory procedures, and Canada hadn't been specific enough about what is necessary for an exchange to operate. You don't want that to happen. You don't want what's happening in New York with the New York Attorney General bringing a civil investigation against Tether, which is a, quote, stable coin, which is supposed to be backed against the US dollar, as well as the exchange that it's linked to, Bitfinex, saying, hey, you printed all these Tether stable coins, but you didn't really have enough assets to back up the US dollar amount that you claimed was the amount you minted in Tether coins. So there's these regulatory issues that are playing out in the ecosystem as we speak. And so I'm a big advocate, partly because of my law background, in building a regulation and government and business-friendly ecosystem. Here's why. There's a lot of people in the crypto and blockchain world who are crypto anarchists. They're anti-government, they're anti-establishment. But their view of cryptocurrency and blockchain will trap the crypto world into what I call the hobbyist culture, where not that many people will use it. If we want a blockchain and Bitcoin world that grows like the internet did, to become the defining technology platform of our time, it needs to be friendly to government, to regulators, to people around the world. So here's some examples of things we're advocating for. Yes, you should have privacy in transactions, but they should not be anonymous. There are these dark coins out there like Monero and Dash and some others, which are pushing for anonymity. But my view of it is that anonymity just breeds illegality, and you should protect privacy concerns, but not create anonymous transactions. I think money services businesses such as wallets and exchanges need to comply with KYC and AML requirements around the world. I think when you create tokens, we shouldn't be creating random ICO tokens to sell what is essentially rights to shares in a new venture without securities registration. But we do believe in tokenizing real-world assets, and we're seeing that now, tokenizing physical gold, tokenizing something that has real value in the world to make it more easily tradable. And we're seeing crypto exchanges needing more oversight, as I mentioned, as well as auditing stablecoins. How is that happening in our ecosystem? Float SV is an exchange launched in Hong Kong, which is very focused on the BSV ecosystem. It is pledged to only list assets which really have a real-world value. Tokenize is a token solution in our ecosystem, which won a big tokenization protocol contest we ran. And it provides support for over 50 type of assets, including things like shares, common stock, derivatives, all kinds of things you would see in real life. Coupons, tickets, concert tickets, transportation tickets. And the reason it won our contest wasn't just technological, it's because it recognized the need for legal compliance around the world so that a token issuer would feel comfortable issuing a token. So it built into its system the ability for a company or an issuer to easily comply with the laws of their local jurisdiction, such as having the ability to revoke, confiscate, or restrain the transfer of tokens. That's something most governments would insist upon around the world. So it's built for legal compliance. In the IP realm, the things I'm seeing are things you see here. There's a race around the world for patent protection in the blockchain space. Everything from cryptocurrency payment inventions, security, tokenization, smart contract. We don't have to get into detail into it now, but there is definitely a recognition from major businesses around the world, especially the banks, and payment systems that they need to protect IP that's being innovated in this world. Some legal issues I'm seeing, particularly in the United States, are things that actually can be good and can incentivize the use of blockchain as a record-keeping system. So for example, the state of Delaware, where many corporations are registered in the United States, has passed a law allowing shareholder records of public companies to be kept on a blockchain. It doesn't mean they had to say that, but they're trying to incentivize companies that are registered in Delaware to use blockchain technology for shareholder registration. And it raises the question, what else could you hold on the blockchain? In Arizona is trying to be a very blockchain-friendly state in the United States. They're recognizing smart contracts as a valid contract, meaning they're answering the question, well, if it's coded, does it have the same force and effect as a normal written agreement that you would sign that we would expect to see as lawyers? And in Arizona, the answer is yes. In addition, they also answer the question, in the blockchain world, when you put a transaction on the blockchain, you attach a digital signature to it. And Arizona is basically saying a digital signature that's used in this world also has the same effect as an electronic contract signature that is valid under e-signature laws around the world. I know the EU and the UK obviously follow model laws about electronic contract signatures, saying that the electronic signature is valid as long as it's associated with data that's attached or logically associated in electronic form with that. I think there'll be some interesting legal questions in the future about how you have to attach a digital signature on a blockchain to a contract, whether it be a smart coded contract or a full text human language agreement. But those are some interesting questions that will come in the future. In addition, we're facing questions, for me, from my former litigation past, about how you deal with this from an evidence perspective. Vermont was very avant-garde in 2016 in enacting a law that says if a digital record is recorded on the blockchain, it actually can be admitted into court as evidence as a business record if it meets certain standard exceptions that you would apply to the business records rule under evidence law. Same thing in China. In September of last year, there's an internet court system in China that ruled that blockchain records are admissible in internet dispute courts, which decide things such as, for example, IP piracy and infringement cases in China. So there are courts and government agencies around the world recognizing they have to get in front of this question of how the blockchain world will create new questions in law. How do we answer them? And if they want people to use blockchain, they then have to answer those questions, hopefully proactively, rather than waiting for years down the road. So finally, what does this mean for all of you as you think about your own futures in law as well as in the corporate world? Well, what are changes that are coming? It's just like what happened in the internet some 20 years ago. It required a rethinking and a reanalysis of who we are as lawyers and people who provide legal and risk management advice. I think lawyers are going to need to understand how data and records are actually recorded on a blockchain. That's going to be fundamental. You don't have to know how to code, but you have to understand when businesses start using the blockchain, how the function actually happens. In addition, you have to start thinking about how the existing laws in your own areas of practice apply in this new world of distributed data keeping, distributed transactions. In addition, if you're a litigator, you're going to have to start thinking about, well, my goodness, I might have to start searching the blockchain for evidence. And how am I going to retrieve it? How am I going to authenticate it to get it into evidence in a court of law? It's possible, but you need to actually follow the different steps of custody. In addition, most of us are writing and dealing with written contracts. If we move into a world where some of them are smart contracts, you have to start thinking about what is the process to convert a human language contract into a smart contract? How do I verify the smart contract accurately reflects the human language contract, because that may become a source of disagreement in the future if there is some discrepancy. And that's a process I think law firms and corporations will start engaging with their technology teams and converting human language contracts to smart coded contracts. And we need to develop business processes for the blockchain world. Some of the things will have to change. We'll have to evolve how we keep data, how we have custodians of data, what data actually even gets added to the blockchain. Not everything belongs on the blockchain. And not everything belongs in smart contracts. And not everything belongs to be engaged with cryptocurrency. So you have to think about, as a company or an outside counsel, what are the business processes you would recommend be done on the blockchain world. And that also leads to an interesting question about dispute resolution. I've been asked about this a lot, which is, well, wait a minute. What happens if there are disputes? I foresee a world where if you're ingenious, you start new dispute resolution forums and specialists who understand the blockchain world, who are tasked with deciding disputes in a smart contract world. I think specialization will occur with alternative dispute resolution as well. So on that note, I want to leave you with this thought. It's the thought I had some 20 years ago when I was a young lawyer thinking, where do I want to make my mark? And at the time, the internet was booming and it was emerging. I decided I want to go there. It's the path that led me to a career in all kinds of aspects of the internet and digital technology. And it led me to the Bitcoin world, something I couldn't have predicted. And it led me to helping lead an industry right now that's focused on using this advancement in blockchain technology to improve efficiency, to create better financial access for people around the world, especially in developing countries, and to transform the business processes that we know in ways we can't even think of. Every day I'm amazed by the creativity of ventures around the world, businesses big and small, about what we think is possible with blockchain technology. It's just starting. We're in early days. There are questions, there are criticisms, there are people wondering, where's this all going to lead? And I ask you to think about what's possible more than anything else, rather than being afraid, like lawyers often are, about what the future holds.